August 2025. An interstellar object is crossing the inner solar system. The most watched journalist in UAP history goes on camera. He calls scientific engagement with it inflammatory. 6 weeks later, he returns with a phrase. He calls it a distraction from the main game. This is the other hand. A Sentinel Network exclusive investigation. We started covering this object in December 2025. We went in skeptical. We assumed we would find a strange comet and move on. What we found instead was a suppression apparatus. We documented it across 35 briefings. We documented the ghost coma. 80 to 90% of the object's water production was coming from thousands of kilometers away from its surface. 5 independent teams. 5 different instruments. No physical mechanism anyone could name. Independent scientists used 7,578 observations to calculate the object's trajectory. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory used 782 from the same raw feeds. The missing 90% changed the thrust profile entirely. That is not a rounding error. We also documented when NASA quietly altered database entries after anomalous papers were published. We have the timestamps thanks to Avi Loeb using the Wayback Machine. TESS is NASA's planet-hunting space telescope. It orbits Earth continuously, and its job is to watch. During the precise window when 3I Atlas was closest and most observable, TESS went into contingency mode. That means it shut down its primary science operations. The telescope that should have been watching the most anomalous object ever recorded in our solar system went dark at the exact moment it mattered most. By March 2026, we published the verdict. 28 briefings, 57 anomalies. The icy grain theory for the excessive water was dead. China's repurposed Mars orbiter killed it at its closest approach to the Sun. The conclusion was on record. The entire time, the people running the UAP disclosure apparatus were somewhere else entirely. We searched every platform, podcast, congressional record, and public statement from the 10 most prominent figures in the UAP disclosure ecosystem. December 2025 through April 2026. Here is what we found. Luis Elizondo, a career counterintelligence officer still drawing a Space Force paycheck, while running the most visible public UAP campaign in history. He was on his book tour, on Joe Rogan, on television. He told audiences the government has known about non-human intelligence for decades. The live interstellar object did not get a sentence. David Grush testified under oath about non-human crash retrievals going back to 1933. David Fravor is the pilot whose encounter began the modern UAP era. Both spent the coverage window on other things. Neither referenced 3I Atlas once. Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, the primary policy architect of the disclosure push, active in public commentary across the entire window. When the Trump disclosure order dropped in February 2026, he spoke about consequential moments. The object on its way to Jupiter was not in that statement. George Knapp's podcast catalog from this period covers classified programs, Skinwalker Ranch, and document leaks. Nothing on the object transiting the solar system. Jeremy Corbell's entire model requires classified sources. 3I Atlas was documented openly by NASA and the National Science Foundation. No whistleblower attached. He ignored it entirely. Gary Nolan, a Stanford immunologist, the one credentialed scientist inside the disclosure ecosystem with the tools to engage hard, anomalous data. He spent our coverage period pursuing historical documentation in Vatican archives. he did not comment on the live, anomalous object. Ross Coulthart went further than silence. He went on camera in August and called the scientific engagement inflammatory. Then in September, he told his audience it was a distraction. 2 active dismissals. From the journalist who built his career on the premise that institutions suppress anomalous evidence. Stephen Greer partnered with a beverage brand to run a dry January campaign using 3i Atlas proximity as a marketing premise. That is not coverage. That is product placement. Avi Loeb, the outlier. He published the papers, documented the anomalies, and called for an intercept mission. He operated entirely outside the disclosure ecosystem. That is probably why he was the only one who said anything. Every person whose operational model requires government-held crash retrieval evidence said nothing. The one academic who uses telescopes instead of whistleblowers said everything. The most prominent journalist in the space called it inflammatory, then called it a distraction. Mark the date, February 19th, 2026. Trump ordered the Pentagon and all intelligence agencies to begin releasing UAP files. Every figure who said nothing for 4 months suddenly had a press cycle and a national audience. That same day, Loeb published his paper on the anomalous jets. The next day, we published our analysis. 3 nozzles at 120-degree separation, wobbling on harmonic periods, holding a tight collimated configuration for 4 straight nights, then abruptly switching modes. We called it a propulsion system hiding behind its own exhaust. 99% of the object's total light came from the jets and the cloud, not the hull. 3i Atlas crossed Jupiter on March 16th and left the solar system. The disclosure apparatus activated at full volume on the exact day Loeb published the jet paper. The object cleared the solar system 3 weeks later. We are not saying this was coordinated. We are documenting that it happened. The managed disclosure narrative has a specific shape. It is past tense. Crash retrievals from 1933. Biologics in storage. Programs running for decades. The message, we found them. We have them. Someone is already running this. The appropriate response is to wait for the file releases. 3i Atlas was present tense. It crossed Jupiter on March 16th and it was gone. No classified facility. No controlled timeline. The object came in at 60 kilometers per second, shed anomalous chemistry our own models cannot explain, and left. An object like that breaks the core claim that non-human intelligence is already under control. It cannot be absorbed into the disclosure script. That script requires the audience to wait. Waiting for file releases. Waiting for the insider. 3i Atlas was not waiting. It was already here, and then it was gone. The audience most equipped to recognize what 3i Atlas was spent 4 months watching the other stage, reading about Grush's lawsuits, watching Elizondo on Rogan, waiting for the Pentagon file releases. They were not watching the sky. Coulthart named it out loud. The main game. He said 3i Atlas is a distraction from it. That framing only works if there is a narrative that needs protecting. What were they protecting? The object crossed Jupiter on March 16th. By any standard account, that is when the suppression ends. The event is over. The operation stands down. That is not what happened. In late March 2026, weeks after the object left the solar system, a senior editorial figure at a major scientific publisher made contact with our publication. They reached out through our platform, then followed up through their corporate email. They offered access, encrypted channels, a video call. a password-protected document built on corporate infrastructure during work hours. The document profiled defense contractor-connected scientists and mapped publication gaps in classified research. It offered everything adjacent to 3i Atlas. Think about the timing. The object was gone. Why is the publisher layer of the suppression apparatus still running? The disclosure apparatus is also still running, louder than before. The Pentagon is processing file releases. Congressional hearings are being scheduled. Every figure who said nothing for 4 months now has a full press cycle. The machine that needed you watching the Pentagon instead of the sky has everything it needs. In March, we documented a propulsion system still running on the outbound leg, confirmed by a team tracking carbon dioxide drive signatures to nearly 3 times Earth's distance from the Sun. A machine managing thermal load across a flight plan does not simply power down. If something was deposited at Jupiter, the transit is over. The installation is not. You suppress a transit. You suppress an installation indefinitely. Here is the Sentinel Network's assessment. 3 layers. 1 managed where the public looked. At the Pentagon, at file releases, at congressional testimony. 1 suppressed the data pipeline. Database edits. The test contingency. JPL observation gaps. 1 came for the investigators directly. All 3 were still running in April 2026, after the object left the solar system. The full briefing is on Substack. Link in the description. Keep looking up.